All right, it's time for some hormone chats. Today, we are going to answer some questions. I've been getting a lot of questions, actually. Close this screen here. If you want to access live, I posted the link to do so in the comments, so you can grab that there. I've been getting a lot of questions lately about what is normal versus not normal in perimenopause. So basically, let's walk through that because I want you to have a really clear understanding of what is quote unquote normal and what's not, so that you don't just sit and struggle and deal with it if what you're experiencing is not normal. So during perimenopause, we know that our hormones are changing, right? We know that this is when most of us are the most symptomatic, is during this transitional period. It's not the actual menopause itself. Menopause itself marks a point in time, not a duration of time. So perimenopause, that time period leading up to menopause, is where our hormones are doing most of the changing. So this is where we tend to have the most symptoms. So with our changing hormones, we know that we can't totally control that, right? There are a lot of factors we can control surrounding how we feel and how can we make those hormone changes as bearable as possible. But to some degree, we can't control it. So there are some ways that you might feel that are considered a normal part of this. It's when your symptoms start to become completely unbearable that we start to say, hey, let's look a little bit deeper. It might not just be normal perimenopause. There might be something else happening that is making this experience much, much harder for you when it doesn't need to be. So what I would consider to be normal are hot flashes or night sweats. Those are symptoms we hear about a lot. So hot flashes or night sweats that are like, okay, it's kind of annoying, but it's bearable, versus having hot flashes 10 times a day to the point that you don't want to leave the house because you don't know when they're going to come on and you just can't deal with it. That turns a corner to where that is not normal. And there's likely some underlying hormone imbalances making your symptoms way, way worse than they need to be. Same thing with night sweats. I'll use myself as an example here. Night sweats has always been one of my biggest hormonal symptom. And when I really started working on that, it took them from every single night during certain times of my cycle where I would wake up. There was about a week out of each month that I would wake up drenched, have to shower, have to change the sheets, just meh. And then I started really working on my hormones. And now I would say I sometimes get a little bit sweaty at night, a little bit of covers on, covers off. And I do notice that that's cyclical. So I do think it's hormonal, but it's completely manageable versus before I was miserable. So that's the difference. Other things that are considered normal, you may find yourself having a little bit of trouble sleeping, particularly early on in perimenopause. But I don't even necessarily consider this one totally normal because we can typically impact it. So if you're struggling with sleep, that's one of the very first symptoms that tends to come on during perimenopause, but there's a lot we can do to help it. So again, if sleep is something you're struggling with a lot, insomnia, difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, that's if it's happening all the time, we can impact that. I'm very confident that we can impact that. Cycle changes. This is the other one that I really wanted to mention. Your period is likely going to change. Occasionally, okay, there's a kind of needle in the haystack woman who will just go from super short perimenopause to achieving menopause really, really quick and not much of a period change in between. That's rare. By far, most of us experience period changes during the perimenopause phase. So what does that look like, or what should you expect? Typically, what happens is you can experience heavier bleeding initially. That is not uncommon. Another thing that is common is going longer periods of time between bleeds. So you might find, oh, hey, my period's a week late. Okay, now I'm going 2 months without bleeding. I'm going 45 days without bleeding. Kind of that spacing out of the actual bleeding, that is considered normal. And again, if you're still cycling regularly, but you're having a little bit heavier cycles in the beginning, that is also very normal. What's not normal is if you are bleeding 3 times a month. If your bleeding is so heavy, or if you're spotting all the time and it's impacting your quality of life and your daily functioning to the point where you're hesitant to leave the house certain times, that when it gets to that point where it's impacting your quality of life and what you do on your day-to-day, that's not normal, right? So again, if your period's spacing out some, sure, okay, that's normal. But these periods all the time, or going to, or having like super, super heavy, massive bleeding where you didn't before, that's something we can impact as well. So this is where it also really helps to talk this out with someone. So if you're wondering, is what I'm feeling normal, then this is your time. This is your encouragement, your opportunity to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions like that all the time. Shoot me a DM, however, post it here in the group so we can all learn from it. But those are the big things that I would consider normal. So period changes, maybe a little bit of difficulty sleeping in the beginning, nothing that should be completely unbearable. Nothing that should be making you absolutely miserable in this period of time. Mood changes is one that we also hear a lot about. In my opinion, that's again something that we can hugely impact. So as always, I'm a broken record on this one. Don't struggle in silence. There is too many things we can do. And I want to emphasize that when I talk about things we can do to help your symptoms, I'm not talking about hormone replacement. I work with women who are on hormone replacement, but I'm not a prescriber. I don't prescribe it. And the great majority of the time, in my opinion, it's not necessarily needed, especially if you're more in the early perimenopause phase. Okay. So in addition to that, kind of going along that same line, what are things that are considered, we've talked about things that are considered normal. The other question I wanted to address is, what kind of symptoms should I start expecting first? And one of those I already mentioned. So one of the first symptoms we see in perimenopause, oftentimes before your period starts changing, is trouble sleeping. I've worked with women in this menopause space for over 10 years. And without a doubt, insomnia, I can't sleep anymore. That's the most common first thing I hear about. So that's something to watch out for. Changes in weight is another biggie. And I don't mean like a little bit of fluid retention around your period. I mean like, hey, I'm noticing that when I stand on the scale, my weight is up and I'm not doing anything. Like I'm gaining weight by looking at food, basically. Those kind of weight changes can be indicative of perimenopause and telling us that your hormones are making some major changes. And let's see, the other one that comes on early in perimenopause that I see and hear about most is anxiety. Sometimes it's to the degree of like heart palpitations, or you feel your heart racing, anxiety that comes with racing thoughts, that type of anxiety. And typically it's to things that would not have made you anxious before. So again, if you're wondering, is this my hormones or not, think about what kind of person you are, or you were a year ago or 3 years ago. Are you an anxious person, or is this new? Is this a new symptom? And if it is, then that would be our cue to look deeper, because it may be that your hormones are changing and you are going through this time period. So those are some of the things to kind of keep an eye out for. Difficulty sleeping, of course, any changes in your period, although again, this oftentimes isn't the first thing that happens. And then mood changes, particularly if you're feeling more anxious or having racing thoughts more often. That again should be like ping, 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 ping. Okay, maybe I'm in this perimenopause phase. Okay. All right. Those are the two major questions that I wanted to address today. So I will leave it as is. If you have any more questions on any of this, shoot them on over, comment below. Hope you have a great afternoon.